This was the 2010 Supreme Court decision that said that corporations speak with their money, and it led to, someone like Musk in the last election cycle spending, I think it was over 200 million, and like far more than that, just one person alone. It's clearly had completely devastating effects on the political system. Pro-choice arguments has been my body, myself, I have privacy rights over my domain, my uterus, right? And that's still like very popular, powerful pro-choice rhetoric today. I don't actually think it's a great way to think about this issue. I get very frustrated with a lot of the AI arguments. I think we're in a kind of moment of real cyber hype, and it's kind of exciting to be living in a sci-fi fantasy for the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Ever wondered what makes a person real? What makes them a person under the law? Are corporations persons? Are fetuses or embryos? How about trees or rivers? And what about AI? Today, I'm sitting with Lisa Siraganian to talk about these questions. Lisa is a professor of comparative thought and literature at Johns Hopkins University. A few months ago, she published a book titled The Problem of Personhood: Giving Rights to Trees, Corporations, and Robots. The book considers what personhood means, where it comes from, and why any of this matters. Take a listen.
Let's dive into the expanded personhood, which seems to be the main idea that the book is tracing across different axes. So let's start from the beginning. What is really personhood after all?
Yeah, I mean, personhood. We use this term personhood or person in so many different ways, and so that's one thing to be really clear about. So I'm talking pretty precisely about legal personhood, but I get into what we might think of as like moral personhood or ethical personhood too, because there's overlap. But personhood just means the condition or quality of being a person, which doesn't actually really help you very much. So you have to back up and think, okay, what are the possibilities of what a person could be? And for my thinking, I was really relying on this philosopher Antonio Lolordo, who says, like, if you look at the entire history of personhood, you basically see that people pick between 5 characteristics when they're thinking about what a person is, what you could imagine a person is. And essentially they're not going to be surprising. Like, you have to have something like individuality, or it could be like a particular person. You could have something like a role in the world. You have to have rationality. You have to have a self-reflexive personality of some kind, like self-reflexive consciousness. And you have to have moral rights, moral standing. So she said that's like the entirety of basically what people have imagined could go into the soup of personhood. And it doesn't mean that people take all of those when they're thinking through what it could be, but that's generally what philosophers have thought through. So what's useful is that if you think about what corporate personhood is, and we can kind of go back to that, it really only picks out 2 of those parts. It picks out someone who has some kind of rights, like the moral standing part, not all rights, but some rights, the right to sue, the right after Citizens United to say that you have free speech protections, which is a big one, the right after Hobby Lobby to say that you have some religious freedom protection, so First Amendment rights, and that you are some kind of individual entity. So those are basically the only 2 things that corporate personhood has of that large personhood soup thing. And that's why I think it ends up being a problem. We can talk about that a little bit more, about like why it matters that you're only picking out those 2 and leaving everything else aside.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think when average person is thinking about corporate personhood, we're always thinking about Citizens United,
Exactly.
about, this whole idea of speech through money and use of money in political campaigns.
Yeah.
But you also trace corporate personhood into that it's a long process. It's not like it just started with this.
Right.
So where does it start and why?
Such a good question. Hard in some ways to get back to the ultimate root of it. I will say for most people, it did feel like it started with Citizens United. So this was the 2010 Supreme Court decision that said that corporations speak with their money. And it was really an argument to allow political action committees to spend completely freely. And it led to, someone like Musk in the last election cycle spending, I think it was over 200 million, and like far more than that. Just one person alone spending 200 million to affect like the 2024 election cycle. So it's clearly had completely devastating effects on the political system. You just have to say that outright. But to answer your question of where did it actually start, it's actually a lot longer. So it really began in this country. It was like consolidated in the 1880s, like as an idea, and really, tied in with the Industrial Revolution. Although it goes much further back because corporations really get very tied up with the notion of nation states originally. So just to give us a quick example, many of the states in this country started as corporations. And that meant that their status has like mutated in different ways over time. They certainly were more connected to things like a political organization, like a state or nation organization. And then with the Industrial Revolution, they really became entirely huge profit-making enterprises in a way that you don't see before really the late 19th century. So there is this transformation of them as well. But it's a very old idea. I mean, it seems clear it was probably already around like in the 14th century. But, before the Industrial Revolution, what does it mean to think about what a corporation could be it's pretty different.
So basically we can think of Citizens United as not necessarily establishing the doctrine, but sort of using the doctrine to bestow more rights.
Yeah, that's a good way of thinking about it. And then all the other ones afterwards have just given it even more rights. I mean, I think for a long time, the idea of corporations as having like what we might think of as human rights it wouldn't have made sense. Like I think the First Amendment rights are the ones that are really, so that is free speech, religion, are the ones that feel particularly strange to people, I think for good reason.
But why does the legal system need corporations to have legal personhood?
Yeah, right. I mean, you would think. Maybe back up. It's a legal fiction, right? It's not entirely a construct. It's a legal tool. If you think about, I think the easiest way I help students also think about it is like without some notion of an organization continuing after the people who made it, continuing on. So in other words, if it's just a partnership, which is like or sole proprietorship, like these earlier kinds of organizations, as soon as, one of the partners dies, it has to entirely reconsolidate itself. So it has to like begin anew. Or let's say one partner signs a contract, partner dies, what happens to that contract? So in a quick and dirty way, it's just a way of letting business run more smoothly. I mean, I really think you have to think about it as a kind of like engine of capitalism. It just doesn't you don't have to stop when new people come into the organization. And you could also see, like, as soon as organizations get larger, this becomes really necessary. So that's like the basic reason behind it. I mean, you could take a step back even further and say, like, our entire legal system needs some idea of persons. Mm-hmm. Like, we need it all relies on a person being sued or contracting, etc. This actually goes back to Roman law, which divided, like, all law into essentially persons or things. And we still sort of have that sense. Mm-hmm. So, what is a corporation? It's a thing of capital, but it makes decisions like persons. The law's decided it's going to work better if we put it in the person category.
Right. And so that takes me to the work of art you chose for that chapter, which is Hugh Locke's piece that is essentially memorials for dead corporations. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about this work of art.
I love Hugh Locke. He's a British Guyanese artist. And when I found this piece, I think I was looking at his work online and was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect. The one that I talk about a lot is he has a memorial for Enron. And what he did was he created a kind of mock graveyard in Bristol, kind of in the cemetery gardens in Bristol. And they were all, as you said, they were all sort of dead or defunct, let's say, corporations, and all corporations that had some kind of connection to Bristol. So he wanted to use corporations that had either exploited people from Bristol or had been involved in, let's say, slave trade early on, all the way through. And I think it kind of captures what an artist can do, because he really does a beautiful job with making them look like actual memorial grave markers. So if you were just to walk through it, you would think, oh, okay, I'm in another kind of graveyard. Fine, I'm going to take a look. And then you realize what you're looking at, and you get this, I think you get like a kind of uncanny moment. Mm-hmm. Wait a minute. What is this? And once you start realizing these are all corporations, I think it does produce a moment of actually thinking about what corporate personhood is, or why we would think about personifying corporations that, there's no body there under the ground, right? They can't have a body in that sense, but they can do so much in the world, right? They have so many ways to exploit people and in the world. So I think he captures both of those things very quickly with that moment of shock. I haven't seen it. I wish I could. I should go to Bristol and see
it. Yeah. It sounds fascinating.
Yeah. It's also, I'll just say one more thing, which is like, when you're trying to figure out examples, I had seen a Hugh Locke show in London, and I thought, called Procession, which was really wonderful. And I initially tried to work into the piece, and I thought, I can't quite do it. I wonder if he has anything else that might work. And it was kind of astonishing to see that I'd like to think he and I were thinking along similar tracks. So I found this piece fit very well.
That's really fascinating. So staying with the corporate personhood for a little bit, we seem to be always talking about rights of corporate persons. Could corporate personhood, legal corporate personhood, be a tool to think about responsibilities?
It absolutely could, right? I mean, I could say that, as I was, mentioning earlier, it could be whatever we want it to be. It is not like a natural thing. We have decided over time that we're going to privilege the ease of corporations in the world. And we are going to create a situation where we are going to give a certain kind of status and rights to an entity that doesn't have responsibilities, that doesn't have self-reflection and a sense of moral duties, right? That has some kind of rationality, but it's, when you think of like, what is the rationality of a corporation? I mean, it's got ultimately one aim, which is to survive and to produce profit, right? To grow and to produce profit.
Right.
So it's rational in a sense, but it's an incredibly diminished version of what we would think of as rationality. So like I just mentioned these because those are all like the parts we think of as being of going into personhood or could go into personhood. So I think, yes, it would be possible to create an opportunity for like corporate personhood to incorporate duties. I mean, the problem with it, though, is that it's essentially a machine of capital, which, is like embedded in it is the engine of exploitation too. So I think there's always going to be this tug within it, even as you're trying to produce more obligations for it. I mean, there's some early interesting cases, like back in the early 20th century, where this famous case about the Dodge brothers, where Dodge tried to, or Ford rather, tried to say, I'm not going to give dividends to my stockholders because I want to be a philanthropist. I think it's better. I think that's right. I have to remember if I got this right, but it turned out that what he was really trying to do, so it looked like a philanthropic gesture, right? So this was an example of a corporation doing something good for the world. Turns out what he was really trying to do was stop the Dodge brothers from getting their dividends because they were trying to create a rival car company called Dodge. Yeah. So the Supreme Court said, yeah, you can't do that. Like corporations, do actually have to follow the profit model. But I think what the case really brings out is that ultimately any kind of philanthropic gesture, or let's say like pro-social gesture of the corporation is going to be beneficial for the corporation. And that, I think that's ultimately the problem. There's a lot of other countries, though, that have thought through this, and there are other ways you can manage it, right? I mean, you can have labor organizations, for example, having a major say in what corporations can do. You can have the state regulating what corporations can do. I mean, there's all sorts of ways you can control corporations without like relying on corporate personhood to do that.
Mm-hmm. So robots and thinking animals. These are probably the two things that sort of also, when one thinks about expanded personhood, beyond the idea of corporations, but just like, things we encounter that we think, maybe they could be persons. We're thinking about these like chimpanzees, elephants, robots, etc. So these are two chapters. You discuss these two different things. It makes me ask actually about the human. Do we, how do we define the human? Is there a way to define the human in a secular fashion without thinking about, creation, divinity, divine rights, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Or like something like the soul, which is where it often gets talked about as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say on some level, I like like that Lolordo 5-part division, because it doesn't really ask where these things came from, right? It just says almost like there's a kind of consensus that this is what we need, and that this is part of what, like almost like a sense of community knowledge about it. Mm-hmm. So nowhere in the 5 parts do you have a sense of that it has to be by like divine right or by being given from some higher way. But so I guess that's the first thing I would say. I mean, I think what ends up being, if you think about like why we need a term like personhood or why people are reaching for it. I think it is the rights part. Like the rights part became really powerful after like the Declaration of the Rights of Man, French 18th century, and then the UN really put those terms into play after World War II in response to the Holocaust, largely. But there's this whole other component that is really critical that I think is that we're forgetting when we're just relying on something like expansive personhood, which is that if we are, self-reflecting selves with moral duties, that does require us to have certain kinds of responsibilities to act for the world generally, for our community. And I think that is actually a kind of a critical hurdle for any kind of sense of personhood. With animals, just to take, one of the examples, it's tricky. I mean, it came out through with like someone like Peter Singer and his whole sort of animal liberation argument from the 70s, where he was saying, following someone like Bentham, who said like, if they suffer, that's what matters essentially. Like, suffering is what is important. But the way someone like Bentham has to work, the way Singer's argument works is that it really follows a kind of model of discrimination. So he has this idea that really speciesism is a kind of racism against animals. So, on the one hand, I'm absolutely in agreement of everything they're trying to do with more humane treatment of animals, and certainly with dealing with the real issue of climate change, which is utterly destructive of the non-human animal populations. But if you think about like how discrimination works, you have to already have a sense that you're in a community and that some people in the community are not being treated fairly. Once you've broadened it out to non-human animals, you're then in a situation where someone is going to have to speak for the non-human animals because they are not part of that community that can speak for itself. So that immediately raises all sorts of problems about who's doing the speaking. Some people have thought about this as a kind of ventriloquism that has to happen. And it's unclear whether giving animals personhood is like the best way to speak for them. I know you asked about humans, but I kind of went through the animals example just to play it out. I think it's much more complicated with robots because they are entirely created by humans, or AI entirely created by humans. We determine what they're going to become.
Right.
They are also entirely a product of mass capitalism. There's like no way to build the entities that are being built today without the extreme exploitation of human beings. So there's already a whole set of value judgments and moral decisions that are going into making them that we're sort of not seeing if we're only saying, should an LLM be considered a person or not?
So you're using a piece by Nina Kachudurian, where basically there are caterpillars that are made to read, or rather write, quit using us. And then there's another piece, which is interesting. I'm not sure exactly, is it just a piece of art or a piece of making art, where you have this robot, Ida, that is presumably, either one could say cosplaying as an artist or doing art, depending on what you think. And so what is interesting about art is art a necessity? Is humanity, or rather personhood in this case, connected to the capacity of making art?
Yeah. There's a good book on this Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go.
Yes.
It's great. It really is about this. So everyone should read it if they haven't. And I actually sort of stole the title for my conclusion, like letting persons go. But I think on some level, yes. I mean, I do think art and personhood go together in some deep way. I mean, just to use the example, let's say, of either of the pieces you mentioned. So the Cachadorian, she's a terrific artist. She was doing, a contemporary artist in New York. She was doing this, I think, about, 10, 12 years ago. She was doing all these kinds of artworks with insects. And there are a lot of artists who do this kind of bio art, like working with art, with animals or insects as collaborators in various ways. But I think hers really spoke to me. So the one you're speaking of, she takes these caterpillars, she like puts them on a kind of banner. They're live caterpillars. I think it's important. She places them to say, quit using us, as you said, and then takes some pictures of them. But she's clearly also capturing the moment when the caterpillars are starting to crawl away as well. So you can literally see them, enacting their refusal to be part of this piece. But the sly point, of course, is that she is using them to say, quit using us. And also there is no way they could speak this. This is part of human language. Even the idea is like irrelevant to them on some level. It's still, I think part of her point is that even when humans are trying to morally say the right thing for animals or insects, they are already not thinking through what the insects would actually want. They don't want to be used in the moment of being used.
Right.
So, I think, your question was really about whether, like something about how art is and personhood are like mutually inclusive or something like that. Yeah. I mean, I do think on some level we do need to make art to be human. I think that. It's kind of an ineffable aspect of what art is, like that combination of the sensual and the ideas and the spiritual is, and its ability to speak to everyone is also really important. Maybe that is what I'll kind of end with on that question, because, you think about all the art I talk about in this book, it might be privately held, or it might be just in one museum, but it's available to everyone, right? It is public in that sense. Right. Like everyone has access to it. And that's part of what makes it ours as a community. It's part of what makes us human too, is that we have this capacity to share something across people and cultures and also time. And that is, to this point, like pretty uniquely human. When, like the robot Ada that you were talking about produces art, I am not going to say that it creates art. I put all of this in like super scare quotes. I agree. I like your cosplaying. I think that's exactly it. It's like cosplaying being an artist, but it's created by, a gallerist and a corporation. And it was basically a publicity stunt. Some of its paintings have sold at Sotheby's for like $1 million. Wow. But it's all like, it's fancy algorithms created by people. And ultimately what is the meaning of that thing, right? The reason why we care about art is because it is trying to communicate something with us. Like, what is Ada, the artist, trying to communicate? It's just a meaningless question.
Right.
So that's why I don't even think about it as art. But people love this story, this narrative. It's very engaging to think about it because it's science fiction.
It is art about art, right?
Ada herself. Ada herself is
the piece of art. Maybe the artist is the one who made Ada in the same way that Cacciatorian is making caterpillars do things, rather than Ada is making the art.
That sounds a more fair way of thinking about it.
Another work of art in the book, Antepartum.
Oh yeah, the Mary Kelly.
So say a little bit about it. What do you think of it? How does it speak to you?
So this was the chapter on fetal personhood. And she did this actually right around the time of Roe v. Wade. So it was a while ago. And what it is, I saw it at the Whitney for the first time live. It's really quite amazing. She just took a camera and shot it at her like 8-month pregnant uterus, and you just see that. You just see her uterus, and you have her hands sometimes sort of around, sort of feeling on top of her stomach, and you sometimes see, the fetus maybe moving if you look really closely, and it's maybe a few minutes, and it's on a loop, and it's a very large, blown up video loop. I think what's so powerful to me about that was that she's clearly like playing with a lot of the tropes of, let's say, Mary, Virgin Mary, a kind of iconography of the mother, at the same time as she is clearly saying on some level that this is in her body, like she is the one who has turned the camera onto her body. She is the one whose hands are sort of helping us see where that fetus might be at any given time. So I think it captures, again, like very quickly, what I was trying to say in that chapter, which is that there's this instinct we have to just think of women's bodies as containers for embryos and then fetuses. And I think everything she's doing in that piece is making it clear why that simple division doesn't work. We want to think about it that way, but it just doesn't actually work.
In relation to the container analogy, there's another analogy in the book, which is about, let's call it the violinist analogy.
Oh, yeah.
So tell us a little about the violinist analogy.
Right. This is a famous thought experiment by a philosopher, Judith Thompson, who said, again, very early on, so this is like before Roe v. Wade, in the early 70s. I say that because this is a moment when like the U.S. Supreme Court was all men, right? And she said, okay, let's just try to imagine a pregnancy in a different way. Let's imagine that you are a famous male violinist, and you are taken in the middle of the night and into a hospital and hooked up to somebody for 9 months who needs your body to live. And then after 9 months, you'll be free. She said, do you have to morally...
So you are the violinist, or you are the one who's hooked to the violinist?
So in her example, I believe she's trying to say, like, what would it feel like to be the violin? Oh, okay. No, sorry, you're right. I got it wrong. Yeah. So you were trying to keep alive the famous violinist. Thank you for reminding me. Yeah, I got it reversed. So do you have a moral responsibility to keep the famous male violinist alive?
Hooked to you, because that male violinist cannot live on his own.
Exactly. Yeah. And she said, even in that case where we know this is a live human being who has already made good on his, potential in the world, you don't have moral responsibility to do that. And I think it was a very clarifying example for people. I mean, it's kind of extreme, but I think her point is saying, like, even somebody whose personhood is cannot be questioned, you do not have to. You are in morally safe grounds to say, no, I would prefer not to. And I think it was a powerful thought experiment for the Supreme Court, I think you can make an argument that it helped those male justices sort of think through pregnancy a little bit more.
Right. And so this is really fascinating, because the idea of making it not a child, but this is a male, presumably a famous violinist.
Yes.
So there is this kind of, it's not a fetus. It's not something that we don't know how it will grow up. It might be like a horrible person or a mass murderer or whatever it is. This is a famous violinist who's sort of doing good in the world. And that opens that sort of made me think about the place of potentiality in when we're thinking about fetal personhood, or and of course fetal personhood is, you make very clear that this is the tool that has been used by a lot of anti-choice arguments. It seems to revolve around this idea of potentiality, what could happen, but also there is, at least in political rhetoric, the potentiality of, say, a teen mom, what could happen to her life. So help us think a little bit about potentiality. What role does it play? Can we think about potentiality in a liberatory fashion, or is it always going to be something that just ties us down, if you will?
It's a really good question, because potentiality has been part of the, let's say, anti-choice rhetoric for a long time, with exactly the way you were talking about it, like the potentiality, let's say, of the embryo or the fetus to become a human being. And I think it has, that has tripped up people a lot of ways. If you look at how the language is been modified over years, now what you see is like DNA being even understood as potentiality. So there's been actually some really good work done at looking kind of rhetorical analyses, looking at the way DNA has sort of taken over for what used to be considered like the soul.
Right.
So you have like the possibility of like what your chromosomes can become, right?
Yeah.
But I think essentially that a lot of the potentiality arguments are still, from my mind, they're kind of still getting trapped in this idea of the pregnant person as the nurturing, body container for the potentiality that is the embryo and fetus, instead of recognizing the entirely imbricated way that the embryo and fetus will be throughout a pregnant person's, both during their pregnancy and throughout their life. I use in the book the example of the placenta, which is still like completely misunderstood in popular culture. But, the placenta, as I know as a physician, is, it's entirely, it really like breaks down the idea that you can like separate out a woman's body and the fetus, right? I mean, it just makes things messy, right, for people. So I think, another way of thinking about, let's say, pro-choice arguments has been, for a long time, essentially it was sort of the container analogy was really kind of a property-based analogy, right? To say, like, my body, myself, I have privacy rights over my domain, my uterus, right? And that's still like very popular, powerful pro-choice rhetoric today. I don't actually think it's a great way to think about this issue. It has been the way like Roe v. Wade was decided, which then of course got struck down in 2022 with Dobbs. But early on, actually, Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, I don't know, like maybe in the early 80s, a better argument for pro-choice would be equal protection. I think this gets to your potentiality question, which is to say, if you are making arguments on behalf of pregnant persons about what they can do with their body, you are withholding from them equal protections under the law. You're withholding from them their potentiality as persons in the world. And this is not fair, right? This is, to go back even to like the violinist, like to say that you have to take that 9 months and you can't do anything else is also withholding your potentiality from you. So I think there are ways to imagine like equal protection arguments for choice as being supportive of potentiality.
And in that case, you don't get actually into this dilemma of, is fetal personhood real or not real?
Right.
It doesn't actually matter.
It doesn't matter.
All.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So staying with potentiality, do you think debates around AI personhood is a debate of potentiality? Maybe potentially they become our overlords. And
No,
we have to...
I think, as you probably noticed, I get very frustrated with a lot of the AI arguments. No, I think, part of what I was trying to do in like that chapter, I have a whole chapter on e-personhood and what's going on in these debates about e-personhood, which is essentially the idea that if you are going to give personhood rights to corporations and other kinds of entities, why not give them to AI and robots if they can be autonomous? Okay, that's essentially the argument, and it has been made, and people have taken it seriously. In all sorts of ways, I think that is getting stuck on certain kind of like sci-fi notions of potentiality for AI, right? We have these fantasies about the autonomy of AI and robots. I mean, we have actually no evidence that they have the kind of autonomy you would really need to imagine their personhood. And we can have a kind of argument about what the LLMs are doing, but if you think back to those 5 characteristics, everything they're doing is a statistical operation in language that has been constructed by human beings. So I have a lot less patience for that argument at this point. I think we're in a kind of moment of real like cyber hype, and it's kind of exciting to be living in a sci-fi fantasy for the moment, I guess.
Yeah.
Doesn't feel like a place I want to go, but
yeah, there was this article, I think, in the New Yorker a week or 2 weeks ago about Claude.
I didn't see this.
It's really fascinating, but it makes a very interesting point, which is Claude and all the LLMs have access to our fantasies about independent robots. Right. So in a way, if they are building their own consciousness through our fantasies, Claude is learning, what happened in all these sci-fi.
Yeah, like 2001.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's learning that.
Right. So it's learning. I mean, it's, I think something very interesting is happening right now with AI. I think what we're seeing is a kind of consolidation of human knowledge, that we've never had before. And we have these tools now to, in a kind of sociological way, to figure out like what some of the common themes are, as you're sort of saying, in human knowledge or in human fantasies about AI. But that's us. It's a tool about our cultural production.
Yeah.
And I think there's just something very exciting about imagining aliens or imagining other entities, imagining others, because we're imaginative people. Like, imagination is part of what makes us human. But that's fantasy.
So I'm going to stay with your frustration with this a little bit. And you could see in the book that you're frustrated a little bit with expanded personhood. You seem to be, there seems to be something you're questioning. Could one describe it as hypocrisy? Is this what you're frustrated with? There is this, am I right in reading like an undertone of frustration with expanded personhood?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think it's this very powerful tool that we can imagine it. I think, once you get certain tools, you think, what can I do with this tool, right?
By the tool, you mean the idea of expanded personhood?
Right, exactly. Yeah. Like of let's say corporate personhood, which I should just reiterate is where all of this comes from. I mean, that is in the end of the day the problem with expanded personhood, that it needs the basic operations of corporate personhood. That is the model. There is no other model for artificial personhood of the kind we're talking about. And so it does retain all of these aspects of corporate personhood. The most important one, or the most serious one, is that it's just this engine for producing more entities with rights without duties. And I sort of think about that as a kind of like runaway train, like more and more things in the world, entities in the world that are demanding their rights without having a sense of of anyone being responsible. And it's hard to imagine that going well, right? We've already seen that is not going well. And just you can use the example of climate change. You could use all sorts of examples. So I think, yes, my frustration, to go back to that issue, is that, when I was first thinking about this, I thought, well, I'm pretty sure about the versions of expanded personhood that are bad, that I think are really mistaken. But I was unclear about like non-human animals and environmental personhood. Like I really thought, maybe these are ones that can be really productive and useful. And the more I researched it, the more I realized, oh, actually they are not able to do any of the work that their advocates think they can, right? And so it ends up really being a kind of dangerous, like dead end that is really taking people's energies often in wrong directions. I mean, just to use the example of Ecuador, that's the example I often think about, because Ecuador is the place that actually put rights of nature into their constitution, right? So the rights of Pachamama, which is like kind of the indigenous notion of the earth. Right. Put that in the constitution. So the hope was that is actually giving rights to the environment, right? Giving rights to nature. What have we seen since then? Environmental devastation in Ecuador has only gotten worse. Like it seemed to have absolutely no effect. And from everything we can see, that actually seems to be the trend. Like it hasn't actually done the work that one had hoped. So if you want to think about it just as a tool, the tool hasn't been working. So then the question is, are there better tools? Right. I think there are better tools. I think personhood has its place, absolutely, but I think it's becoming a dangerous distraction. So
let's stay with the Ecuador example for a second. And you make this point that this is a very roundabout way of admitting that these constitutions or these legal systems are not actually giving rights to indigenous people. Yeah. So can you say a little more about this?
Yeah. So a good example is sort of what happened in New Zealand, because New Zealand was one of the first places to do this with Wanganui, I think it's called, River, which is the Maori name for this river in New Zealand, which was given rights as a living entity. But even in that case, which is basically considered like the shining example of rights for the environment, essentially it does not actually transfer any property to the indigenous populations, the Maori populations. The old treaties are still entirely in effect, right? The sovereignty is still all New Zealand. But essentially what has happened is that like some indigenous communities are now allowed to like participate more in what happens with the river. So, so that's, again, best case scenario, but it actually isn't changing anything about, let's say, notions of ownership, right? Like Western property notions of ownership. It's like entirely, all of those regimes are still entirely in place. So it's a lot of effort with, I don't think, a lot of results. So that's the concern. Yeah.
And in this case, the indigenous people are actually the minor things they can get. They are better off getting it through the personhood of the river rather than their own personhood, which is the level of of all the works of art that are in the book, and we'll talk about a lot of them. What is the one that sort of touched you the most?
Probably the one I started with, which is this Laurie Anderson piece called Habeas Corpus. It's useful for me. That's called Habeas Corpus. Habeas Corpus is the doctrine coming from the Magna Carta that says that the government cannot imprison you without explaining why they're imprisoning you.
Right.
And like all countries basically at this point have some version, or all I should say, countries that are nominally democratic have this. So she produced this during 2015 during the Armory show. And I saw it when it was in the Smithsonian. She had a retrospective, I think maybe 6 years ago. And I was blown away by it. What she basically did was created this huge foam sculpture, just white foam, like as big as the Lincoln Memorial, of Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial. And she projected a video of a Guantanamo Bay prisoner on it who was talking about his situation in his life, and the fact that after finally getting his habeas corpus petition granted from Guantanamo, in fact, there was like no evidence for him being held. He was the youngest prisoner to be held there when he was 14. He became essentially stateless and was entirely adrift from where he had come from, and the entire situation of being imprisoned had created the situation. And I thought it's a remarkable piece because you see this video projection on the foam and you feel the real alienation and removal of this man. But also for me, it really captured the worry about what happens when we really rely on things like rights to resolve all sorts of problems for us. Because in this situation, he did get this habeas corpus petition, but it really didn't help his situation very much. He was freed, but he also has nowhere to go. His life is in ruins. He has personhood, this kind of expanded sense of personhood, but he doesn't actually have a fruitful life at this point because of what had happened to him. So for me, it really consolidated everything I was trying to do in the book. And we talked about it in the intro.
Yeah. So we always ask this question. What are our vital signs? What are things that we need to pay attention to, monitor, if you will, to know where these conversations around personhood are going?
Yeah, I like vital signs. I know that's the name of the podcast. I mean, I think my way of thinking about this is kind of like a signal and noise issue. I think personhood right now has been very hot and popular, but it's a lot of noise. And I think the vital sign is what is actually happening to people and the environment and the animals in our world. Like what the people who are actually living in our world, what is going on with them, what is happening. So I think if we can, in some ways, not worry about personhood for everything as much, that will give us a much sort of stronger ground to actually see what we're looking at and actually try to build a better world for ourselves. So I guess that would be my sort of vital sign, which is like, just look at the possibilities of the world we have in front of us and not worry about turning things into legal entities.
And what is the sort of the other side of the sign? The sign to go to, what is the direction? Where do you think, a progressive thinking or progressive thought or mode of action in relation to personhood should do?
Yeah. So I think on some level, we still have to keep fighting for personhood for all human beings. I mean, just to be very clear about that. I mean, there are real attacks right now on actual persons, human beings, like whether in terms of where they are, race, gender, trans. I mean, those are real attacks. So that absolutely we have to keep fighting for that and keep our eye on that. But I think also thinking about the power of real solidarity between those groups too is what we should be doing. I mean, I think that is the possibility for progressive action. Instead of thinking about each new individual thing that gets to have its special status as a person, instead thinking about what connects us and unites us as human beings is the way forward. And that is going to mean focusing on things like runaway climate change, right? I mean, and it is going to mean trying to protect non-human animals, because that does also affect all of us in all sorts of ways.
Lisa, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so fun.
Book, The Problem of Personhood, Giving Rights to Trees, Corporations, and Robots. Thank you so much for talking with us about the book.
Really fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. I hope you learned as much as I did. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and make sure to join our Patreon for exclusive content that you don't want to miss. The conversation continues on the Vital Signs Substack, Instagram, and Facebook page. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and any impact this conversation may have on your thinking. See you next time.